Everybody, and welcome to our second Communities in Bloom webinar for 2022. We will be so excited to see everyone in person this October during our National Symposium and Awards in Victoria, BC. But as we want to keep connected with our communities this spring and summer, we will be hosting one more webinar in July other than this one. We'd really like to thank all of our Communities in Bloom sponsors and partners at this time for their contribution towards our 2022 program. Their support and the support of our registered communities is truly appreciated. Today, I'd like to welcome our two speakers, Bill Hardy and Rodney Stott. In today's webinar, Bill and Rodney will discuss the new CiB Green Cities grid and provide practical examples of how your community can strive to become greener through the use of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. Please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A feature throughout this presentation, and we will do our best to address them all. You can find the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and if it has disappeared, you may just need to hover your mouse around the bottom of the Zoom screen to have it pop up. And now I'd like to introduce today's first speaker. Bill Hardy is on CiB's Executive Board of Directors as Treasurer, as well as on the Green Cities Foundation Board and Canadian Nursery Landscape Association Board. He's a very busy man. He's also the owner of Grow and Gather, which is Trace Farms in British Columbia. He has over 40 years experience in retail and management environments, and he's also a landscape industry certified manager. So thank you very much for joining us today, Bill. Our other presenter is Rodney Stott. Rod has spent the last 20 years working with local government, both as a consultant and as an environmental planner. Currently working with the City of Maple Ridge just outside of Vancouver, Rod's role includes development of environmental policies and strategies, initiatives for the city, assisting with corporate strategies and initiatives, and working with the development community. Currently, he's working with city staff and community stakeholders, developing green infrastructure management strategies and rolling out the implementation of action items for various departments. So thank you very much to you, Rodney, and reminder to use your mouse to insert any questions that you might have, and enjoy your webinar. And over to you, Bill.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Bill. For the introductions, and sitting beside me here is Rodney. I came down to City Hall to participate in the webinar today because I threw a surprise at Rod yesterday. We decided that the way we're going to go through this form is line by line, and we're actually going to try to score Maple Ridge using the grid while we're at it. So the grid, the way we've designed it, is to measure how green infrastructure is implemented in your city, kind of giving you a snapshot in time. The way the grid is structured, it's basically either yes, no, or possibly I don't know, or possibly we're working on it. So it's kind of designed that way all the way through, so it makes it easy. Of course, we're following kind of the global standards on what makes green cities work, and we're looking at 5 distinct areas of measurement. So the first one is air quality. We know that green spaces in cities are the lungs of the cities, so we want to take a snapshot on what we're doing within our city to improve air quality. Of course, air quality is really important. There's more people in cities die of pollution every year than just about any other cause. We also look at temperature mitigation. For those of you from the West Coast, you remember last year we had the heat dome. We lost, I think it was 619 people because the coroner's report just came out after that event just recently here. So what are we doing to mitigate heat island effects? or generally lower the temperature in our city. So we look at that. Another important thing, especially with the climate events that we're having now, is stormwater management. What are we doing using green infrastructure or nature-based solutions to mitigate stormwater problems, flooding problems, etc. The next thing that we are going to look at, which I think is in my eyes becoming one of the most important ones, especially the more I read up and look at these things, is protecting our natural assets and land uses. It's way easier to protect the forest in the first place than it is to establish a new forest after you've bulldozed the one down to put up the new subdivision. So the natural assets and land use page, I think, is going to be a critical one. And then, of course, we all want a healthy city to live in. So the last one we look at is health and well-being, a couple of measurements there. So each part of the grid is structured with 20 points for a total of a possible score of 100. And what I think we'll do is we'll dig right in. We'll start on this page that's up on your screen, which is air quality and temperature mitigation, the first part of it being the air quality part. And this section explains how your municipality reduces airborne pollutants specifically through the use of tree canopy and other measurements. So we're just going to go through this line by line. I would recommend, if you have any questions about it, any specific things, put it in the Q&A. We'll do our best to either address it as we get to it or perhaps at the end so we can get through the entire scoring grid. So starting right here, right in front of us, what is the current estimated total crown canopy cover percentage of your municipality? Explain how your municipality measures crown canopy cover. So the world standard has been 30%. That's actually changing. A lot of cities now are looking at 40%. And if you follow Cecil, who runs an institute, is from UBC, he's the head forestry guy from University of British Columbia, but he established this rule called 330-300, which means that there should be 30% of tree canopy in your neighborhood, not just in your city. So what is the current estimated total crown canopy coverage in your city or your community? Is it greater than 30, between 15 and 30, less than 15? And you can see how you score. So Rodney, what's Maple Ridge?
Thanks, Bill. And I wanted to emphasize here, Maple Ridge has the opportunity to learn from a lot of other cities that have been moving forward with some of these items today. So I've been learning and observing what tools have been most effective and performance targets, etc. So for tree canopy cover, I did want to mention that for urban infill areas, the average that I'm seeing across Canada and across our regions, typically in the denser urban areas, somewhere between 20 to 25%. Whereas for cities as a whole, I think across North America, based on the science to date, they are recommending 40% as the standard, the base for tree canopy cover. In Maple Ridge, we came out across the city at an average right now of between 50 to 55%. However, I'm going to put a caveat to that is in our downtown, we're somewhere between 15 to 20%, and we are still growing as a city. So we are definitely at a crossroads here, trying to understand how we can protect and manage the remaining forests that we do have on public land and encourage people to retain and or replant trees within their own backyards or within these urban infill areas. So yeah, we would, for the first one for Maple Ridge, we would score greater than 30%.
Thank you. So it's interesting too that cities are doing a remarkable job, I think, overall at protecting and looking after the publicly owned trees, our street trees and our setbacks and stuff for riparian areas and environmentally sensitive areas. But where we are losing a lot of tree coverage, tree canopy, is on private property. So it's something that cities should also look at is programs to encourage their citizens to plant trees in their own yards. So we'll move on to the next one. Do you have a municipal tree bylaw or policy that includes performance requirements to meet minimum crown canopy coverage targets? So the first question is, do you have a tree bylaw? And it's kind of a two-part question, because does your tree bylaw try to recognize the fact that if you're removing a large tree, you're putting in, say, a small caliper tree, are you doing that on a one-to-one basis, or if it's a larger tree, are you suggesting that the homeowner or the developer needs to replace it with more than one tree? So I kind of call that a canopy percentage versus a unit. So what is it in Maple Ridge, Rod?
So right now, for our tree bylaw, we essentially have a 30% requirement on the developable portion of a lot. The reason we chose that 30 percentile performance target was because we estimate our conservation areas are currently at around 30%, 25 to 30%. So when you put those two scores together, we're still trying to work towards our 50 to 60 or 50 to 55% performance target overall for the city. I do want to emphasize, though, in our tree bylaw, we have recognized the principle of the right tree, right place. As we continue to develop and redevelop our urban infill areas, it's really important, obviously, that we're putting the right size and types of trees into these areas. So replanting is very much something we emphasize and promote and support as a city, not just the retention elements. So based on canopy cover percentage, we have a bylaw that requires every new development to retain 30% of the trees on their site, or they can replace those trees where a arborist and forester has determined that it's not appropriate to retain them. And a third option for them, if there's no way, if they have a hardship issue, they can actually do a cash in lieu replacement fee. It's about $600 per tree, and including additional ratios for compensation and replacement that can be done off-site. So we would have the, based on the canopy cover percentage of 30% right now in our private development area.
And it's interesting, if your community or city doesn't have a tree bylaw, it's something you probably really should push. The Maple Ridge tree bylaw is only 4 years old.
It's about there.
Yeah. And interestingly, the city of Vancouver reduced the size that you had to get a permit for from 30 centimeters down to 20 centimeters. And they're just now discovering that was a big mistake, because they lost like 600 more trees than they expected. And they're going to change that back. So something very easy for you to implement in it. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy to implement in the city. It's actually hard, but it's something that you should work on if you don't have one. So does your municipality or city have an urban forest management strategy plan? This is a simple yes or no. You don't have it, you're working on it, or you do have it. So for Maple Ridge,
currently, Bill, we have one in progress, and I want to emphasize the reason for we have promoted and supported an urban forest management strategy is it's one thing to be able to say, we want to protect these trees and manage them on the public lands and the private realm and the transition areas in between, but somebody's got to maintain and manage these systems. So that's a big part of the urban forest management strategy, was the operational maintenance components, in addition to the succession planning, life cycle analysis, and dealing with all of the potential risk hazard management issues and items that were occurring around our city. So we recognize these are really important natural assets for the city, but we also have to make sure that there's a proper management program and resources in place to help us manage those natural assets. So ours would be in the 3, we would score 3 here, is currently in progress.
Okay, next one, you have regulations and or bylaws requiring a certain percentage of green space and or pervious or permeable surfaces for new developments, and what kind of regulation might that be? And the target that we kind of set as a minimum is 30% that we would require for any new development. So do you have regulations in place that require at least 30%? Yes, it's greater than, or it's less than 30% but greater than 10, or you don't have any requirements at all on new development. So go ahead and flush that one out, Rod.
Okay, so in this case, we are not talking about environmentally sensitive areas that are protected. We're talking about on the developable portion of a site, whether that's a building, permit site for a single family or a larger development site, the city of Maple Ridge has pervious area requirements under our bylaws for approximately 40 to 45% pervious cover, and that's however, that does not currently apply to our higher density apartment buildings and complexes. So that's something the city is continually is starting to work on. And I want to just put a caveat again on this one is our urban infill areas where there's denser development, 40% is not probably a viable or practical target for those urban infill areas. We're trying to work and research out what is an appropriate target to work towards. So, but currently we have something sitting at around 40 to 45% for the majority of our new development. That includes single family, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and so on.
So this is here, and it's also, we'll talk about it again with a little bit of a different slant under stormwater management. It's here because green spaces actually, and pervious surfaces actually improve air quality within a city because they do a certain amount of filtering of the air, particularly the PM 2.5 particulate matter and stuff like that. So anyway, so what would you score, Rod? You'd be greater than 13 on this.
So it would be greater than 30. We would have a 5 on here as well. And I want to also emphasize, Bill, on this one, the permeable surface and is really important for us if we're going to emphasize green infrastructure in our community, how we can integrate the stormwater management and localized drainage and flooding into those areas, in addition to all of the climate change resiliency pieces that you've been speaking to, and along with health and so on. Yeah. So that's a big part of what we do here.
So when we get to water management, we'll look at this one again and with a little bit of a different angle on it. Okay, thank you, Lauren. You can move to the next tab, I guess, which is temperature mitigation. So this section explores how a municipality reduces localized temperature and heat island impacts through the use of living green infrastructure in large and small spaces, including things like ground cover, turf grass, trees, and everything in between. It's funny that most cities, trees get all of the credit, but it's the entire working landscape that actually makes the biggest impact. So it's not just the trees. In some places, that's maybe all you can have, like for example, street trees down a boulevard or something. But when you combine it with parks and other green spaces and everything, it's the entire working landscape. So does your municipality have effective regulations or policies to assist with urban heat island temperature management strategies? Yes, and again, for each of these things, there's probably more than one measurement. But for the purposes of the grid, we're picking on one thing, one measurement for each area. So yes, street tree planting and low impact development requirements are related to heat island mitigation is required for all new developments. Yes, we have policies, but not always implemented. And I'm thinking there are things like variances and stuff that are provided, which are sometimes required, as Rod already alluded to, because of a density issue, or you don't have really anything that even looks at heat island. City.
Yeah, so thanks, Bill. I think for the city of Maple Ridge, I'd have to put us in that second category of, yes, we have policies and development permit guidelines, but they're not always implemented. And I want to emphasize the reason this category we put this in is a lot of cities, including Maple Ridge right now, you might have currently actions, and strategies available in your community for street trees. They weren't necessarily put in to deal with urban heat island effects or impacts, but we are realizing and recognizing more and more that for some cities, they are blessed with certain assets, natural assets or bioengineered design solutions that have a numerous co-benefits, including sort of health issues, air quality, GHG offsets to heat island mitigation, and so on and so forth. So Maple Ridge is waking up very quickly as I think we're the second fastest growing city in British Columbia, and we have been for the last 10, 15 years. So as we are both developing in our greenfield areas or the sort of more naturalized areas, along with our urban infill areas, we're quickly having to realize how can we work smarter. And a big part of that is working with these natural assets and the bioengineered solutions like the street trees to offset these impacts. So we would score a 3 in this category.
Next one, our green space performance targets an important part of planning and development process. Our targets achieved through area plans, neighborhood level plans, regulations, specific developments. So the question is, yes, green space performance targets are incorporated into the planning process through policy and regulation. Yes, policy is in place, but back to not always done. Or we don't have really any green space policy at all.
So in this category, number 2, I'm going to say that we sit probably somewhere between the first and the second category. We have currently are working with different departments to encourage these policies and the bridge with the actual implementation. So although we have green space targets in general for things like conservation areas, we have pervious area, obviously requirements, so on. What we're talking about here are overall access to public common spaces and shared areas that the public can use. So I'm going to say in our greenfield development areas, the stuff that's outside of our urban centers, we have really good set policies on park acquisition or for new areas, new neighborhoods and so on. We have our conservation targets, but within our urban infill areas, I'm going to have to score us at a 3 right now, where we are in progress. We're trying to work with policy, improve the policy and the development permit guidelines, and slowly work towards not just regulations, but cost sharing. So because as we all know, the cost of land, especially in urban denser areas, is very expensive. So how do we share those costs? And that's currently the discussion we're having right now as a corporation and with the development community.
The next one is similar, but not quite the same. We're talking specifically about green streets. Are they an important part of planning and development process? Median and boulevard streetscapes, pocket parks, road corridors used primarily for living green infrastructure versus concrete, I guess, even including things like non-permeable surfaces like turf grass. So yes, all new urban development areas and major streets are designed with consideration for greener streets, including pedestrian-friendly streets. Green infrastructure design and green street standards are sometimes considered for new developments, but not required. Or again, we just ignore it. We just concrete.
Yeah. So on this one, I'm going to have to just, in all honesty, you know what? I'm going to score us at a 5 right now, but that's somewhere we probably deserve a 4, to be honest. And the reason I say that is the streets, as most of you probably have this experience, we're really limited with all of the competing uses with utilities and servicing and multimodal pathways and so on and so forth. So I'm working really hard with our engineering department, our community planning and so on, to see which streets we can do a better job on to create, I'm going to call them greener streets, to cater to more active transportation choices. We are sometimes, depending on the political culture of the day, said that will have a huge bearing on whether or not we have support for how green our streets are. And but again, it's an education piece, and it's an ongoing discussion about what are other places doing, what can we learn from them, and what can we do better in an incremental fashion in our city. So my kudos to our engineering department is trying hard to do what it can, and along with the planning and operations departments to facilitate that.
Okay, next one, Martin. Thank you. Is landscaping or bioengineering an important part of the development requirements? In addition to tree regulations and street trees, do you support the use of other kinds of landscaping as part of development? And this is where I was kind of trying to capture the fact that even turf grass is an important thing. So yes, we understand the value of the entire landscape, including turf grass, and support its value in reducing heat and cleaning the air, and landscaping is required by policy. Yes, policy is in place, however, development approvals often do not reflect policy, or we don't have anything at all, again, around green spaces. And remember, when we're talking about, we're in the category of heat mitigation here, so that's kind of the overall lens as we're scoring these things. And I'm hoping that everybody's kind of cottoning on now to the way that we designed this is it's a self-assessment. You're not being judged. you're sitting around having a conversation with somebody from the city, exactly like Rod and I are doing right now, and doing a self-score. And we'll look back at when we're done and see how we've done and how we can use this tool. So specific to this question, Rod.
Bill, I'm going to put the city of Maple Ridge, again, if there was something between the 3 and a 5, but I'm going to put a 3 down here for the city of Maple Ridge. And the reason for that is we are currently going through a period where we've got a lot of containment boundaries, urban containment boundaries set up to try and reduce or prevent sprawl. But we also have a population quota or mandates to try and fulfill as part of our regional agreements. So that requires densification and growth. So the emphasis has been on densification of a lot of our areas. And as Bill mentioned, these urban infill areas, aside from street trees and pocket parks and community parks in these areas, you know, we're trying to look to green roofs and green decks to have a few garden spaces and extensive green roofs in these areas. But where we have buildings of 6 stories or less, often they're wood frames, and the insurance business industry, the banks and the contractors are not yet comfortable with green roofs and putting any kind of soils on those rooftops until you get into the steel and concrete type structures. So for now, we are very much trying to emphasize landscaping where we can get it on our rooftops, on our decks, around the buildings, and on the streets. So we would have, I'm going to put us at a 3 there because we do our best, but we are having to slowly move forward with probably stronger criteria and performance targets and regulations for our denser development.
Okay, next tab, Warren. So water quality and stormwater management. Water quality and stormwater management overlap. Progressive forms of stormwater management help deal with volumes, flow control, and they filter and clean the water through the process. This section explores how your municipality is working to retain, detain, or treat runoff from rainfall in urban landscapes, which allows both cleansing and control. So again, we're back to permeable surfaces here, looking at it this time instead of contributing to air quality as contributing to how we let water infiltrate in a site versus runoff into a storm drain. So rainwater runoff can be retained or detained through the use of permeable paving or pervious areas. What percentage does your city have? So the answer should be the same as the last one, just a little bit of a different lens. And I think I might change up this question.
We can modify this for sure. So I think the important part of this question that we were trying to emphasize, Bill, is that cities have the opportunity to require new developments to deal with the volumes of water coming off the site, the flow at which it comes, the flow rates at which it comes off, and the water quality as part of their new development requirements. Traditionally or conventionally, a lot of that has been left up to local government, or and it's, you know, it's in the pipe, and whether it goes into a creek or a river or somewhere else, the costs are often transferred on to the general public, and the impacts have already occurred. So the big part about this is trying to get regulations that can help share the costs and mitigate the impacts before they get into the pipes and into the creeks and the streams. So in our case, Maple Ridge, we are following provincial and regional guidelines and standards that have been put out by Metro Vancouver. And there's been a lot of good work to date done on this, on both detention systems for the volumes, working with orifice or the sizing of the pipes to mimic forest runoff rates, in addition to controls on site that are often bioengineering preferences for water quality improvements, for biofiltration and exfiltration or evapotranspiration. And that's what you started in the last 10 years. Maple Ridge has started to see a lot of innovations with developers and engineers, landscape architects, putting their mind to how they can do this on site before the water leaves it.
Okay, and we get into a little bit more specific in the next couple of questions, but you would probably score that one a 5 again.
I would put a 5 on that.
Okay. So the next one deals, asks the question specifically again, but looks at green roofs as a possible solution. So in your city, do you have a green roof bylaw or regulation? if maybe you don't have a bylaw or regulation, do you have incentives for green roofs, like development cost charge reductions or something like that, or you don't even talk about green roofs in your city?
Yeah. So on this one, I would score Maple Ridge with a 3. We have policies and development permit guidelines. We have been trying to lead by example as a city in developing new facilities and buildings that have green roofs. And I want to emphasize the difference between an extensive versus an intensive green roof. And the extensive ones tend to have pockets of planting on them, often shared garden spaces and things like that, and or containers with plants and trees in them. And we've been doing a lot of those around our city where possible. And that, again, those are on the 4 to 6 story type buildings. On the larger institutional buildings that the local government has and the future denser apartment buildings, I'm hoping we can move towards more of the green roofs that you see in Europe and in Asia, where you can have more of an intensive approach. But we're not there yet, I think, as a society, from a financial reasons and from operational reasons. We're getting there, but I think for now, I'd put us at a 3. Like I said, there's some improvements there, but the green roofs, as I said, I'm getting more progress on decks and in around the building sites and at this point.
Yeah, we don't really consider them green roofs, but when you're doing a condo complex like the Brickwater here in town, where the landscaping is all on slab, it's kind of like a green roof.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So that actually goes to the next one then, which is kind of, again, the same question, but what about on-site water storage? Again, looking at some of these new developments with on slab, or we're seeing a lot of developments around the world with what they call a blue-green roof, which is where rainwater is harvested for use in the landscape otherwise, or filtered and only leaves the site when it's overflowing.
Yeah.
So what are we doing here?
So I'm going to put us, Maple Ridge is doing well with the on-site water storage. I put it as at a 5 here, but one of the things I wanted to emphasize here is I'm trying to currently encourage some of that water storage in our urban denser areas to go above ground. A lot of the stuff is being placed in chambers or in pipes below the roads and below the parkaves and so on. What I'm trying to aim for as a city is getting the water above ground. You can then have the co-benefits of having water features that can be appreciated and celebrated by, as gathering spaces, but also for heat island mitigation purposes and so on and so forth, bringing the water above ground so the community can celebrate that water as opposed to hiding it and getting it off the site as quickly as possible. So that's where Maple Ridge is trying to make some strides towards the on-site and off-site efforts as to what we can do to not just about achieve functional requirements, but combine the form with the function and create something aesthetically pleasing and with many co-benefits.
So, and we're doing a lot, and I'm sure a lot of cities are, with things like rain gardens and bioswales. You've got some excellent examples of bioswales, which, well, they kind of store the water, they store it temporarily, or almost as important sometimes is just detaining it or retaining it for a while so that it disperses, slowly after the storm event.
We're finding and learning from other communities that these nature-based solutions are far more efficient and effective at dealing with a combination of elements, as we talked about, for infiltration, for biofiltration, and exfiltration purposes. But it's, we're learning from other communities around us who are doing an excellent job of experimenting and figuring out where the pitfalls are and how to sort of go about moving towards their successes and so on. But it's, again, I want to emphasize on these, there's no one size fits all piece or right or wrong to this. It's do your homework, proceed cautiously and incrementally, but there's a lot of information out there that other places have done where they are successful.
Yeah. Okay, so the next and last one in this section deals with soil. We might not think that soil is important when it comes to stormwater management, but it really is. So the question we're asking here is, do we have soil protection and handling plans required by regulation and or by law? Or again, are we just encouraging them? In major developments, it is such a major part of what we're doing and how the site manages its water.
Yeah, and Maple Ridge put in. I'm a happen to be a soils nerd, so I've been doing a lot of research a few years back on what other cities were doing. And one of the reasons I became really enamored with some of the soil best practices from across the globe as well as our country was, again, the multitude of benefits from survival of plant species in the long term, to lower maintenance costs, to mitigation for erosion control, for soil stability purposes, and so on and so forth. With, I've noticed with the few pilot studies we've been looking at, with the more severe weather events, drought and storm events, the areas with a higher quality topsoil and the larger depths of topsoil, those plants and trees are doing very well, or much better than the other plants.
Yeah. So
a lot of this comes down to basic operational concerns like maintenance and replacement fees and survival. But soil protection we have as part of our watercourse protection bylaw, and it's also been incorporated into our servicing for stormwater management purposes, for erosion sediment control. And as a city, I'm finding that there's been a lot of successes and rewards from that regulation.
So how would you score us?
So I put it at a 5 on that one.
Okay, next tab, Lauren. We're doing okay for time. I'll probably go through this next one fairly quickly because this tab on natural assets and land use is all simple yes or no questions. So there's a fair number of them, but we'll try to run through them fairly quickly here, so we have some time for questions and answers at the end. Although the health and well-being page will go by really fast, so we won't skip through this one too quickly. So this section explores what policies your municipality has in place to create effective land use planning and retain and protect existing natural assets. So what kinds of regulations or tools are available to support retention of natural assets and encourage other forms of green infrastructure? Again, each one is a yes or no. Protection of natural assets, wetlands, forests, water bodies, lakes, rivers. So does your city provide protection? Like, do you have setbacks and ESAs and those kind of things?
Yeah. And thanks, Bill. I think the importance of this section that we are trying to emphasize here is there's no one silver bullet here, but through cities emphasizing a myriad of different strategies, and whether it's regulations for protection and or for management, for enhancement and restoration and so on, we can there's a lot of benefits. So we have a fairly progressive watercourse protection set of regulations in the city of Maple Ridge that a lot of the times we're applying 30 meters around our watercourses from the top of bank or top of ravine bank. We also have regulations around slopes over 25%. So we're doing really well on the ESA protection areas. The bioengineered facilities, we have bylaws, a watercourse protection bylaw and a servicing bylaw that helps us with the requirements for these on-site requirements that we talked about. So I can put a 1 in there for the bioengineering. For the regulatory performances for private development, tree canopy coverage, that's the tree bylaw we were talking about. And I have to say, each and every one of these tools required a lot of collaboration, consultation, and some fierce dialogue with the general community stakeholders. But it's been worthwhile to get the understanding and awareness in the community of the importance of these things, both with the general public, the development community, and internally with the various departments. So I'm going to put down a 1 for the tree. Under the tree bylaw, we've been able to cover off a lot of those requirements, and the zoning bylaw. Municipal conservation land acquisition strategy. We are not a wealthy municipality by any means, but so we've had to be prudent by working with different provincial, federal conservation authorities, as well as the regional authority. We've been able to at least emphasize and provide technical information to help us with the land acquisition strategy that has been very productive over the last couple of decades, working with our regional government. And I think it's the conservation authorities out east and so on, working with them to try and figure out where can everybody get the best bang for their buck. So I'm going to put a 1 under the conservation land acquisition strategy. And for the corporate municipal green infrastructure development strategies, tools, and financial, we have an endorsement. It was unanimous by our council the previous year with the larger green infrastructure policy framework. We are now working on an implementation strategy And I have been given the green light to work with all of the different departments and their directors and the general managers, as well as the CAO, to figure out how that's going to be coordinated and where our priorities are and how we're going to sort of roll out the implementation piece along with the financial discussion. So I'll put a 1 there too.
Okay, so then we're on to the next section. What kind of green infrastructure initiatives do you have?
Okay. And again, this was not so Maple Ridge could have more trophies on its shelf. The idea was to try and promote and support, what other places and local communities could do. And for Maple Ridge, again, this was part of an awareness campaign for us to emphasize the importance of different tools in the toolkit. So the urban forest management strategy, we don't have one yet, but we've been given the green light to move forward with one. So I won't give us a 1 there yet, because I'd like to see the devil being in the details. I'd like to see how that pans out. The natural asset inventory, I've been doing a lot of research on the use of remote sensing and LiDAR, in addition to working with forestry companies to figure out how I can go about in a smarter way, proceeding with an inventory of our forests and our natural assets. So that again is underway, but I cannot say that we get a 1 yet, so we would get a 0 for that at this point. That's something on our work plan this year, though, that we are going to be carrying out, is a mapping and inventory exercise of our natural assets. Natural capital evaluation program, again, it's on the docket for consideration as part of our actionable items and implementation items. There is natural capital, for those who aren't aware, that's essentially a measurement of the eco services and benefits that our natural assets provide to our community. So looking at qualitative and quantitative services that our trees and our wetlands and our riparian areas and so on that can provide. There are tools and models around the world now. iTree is a very popular program for determining what those qualitative and quantitative benefits are, and that can also be converted into dollars and cents. So there's a lot of bigger cities using this to try and actually measure what is the smartest and best use of their lands, including their natural assets, versus the costs of development and servicing those areas and so on. So it's a great way to figure out the smarter, better use of lands. So we have a 0 on that 3rd one for now, but we are working, that's on the program. Green infrastructure management, biodiversity management strategy. So I could give us a 1 here. But again, there's cities who are much further advanced and along the lines, as I said, in terms of measuring biodiversity and looking at appropriate indicators and performance targets for that. Maple Ridge has put all of the fundamental pieces together to look at healthy watersheds, including both protection of larger protection for its riparian areas, integrated stormwater management plans that looks at the larger watersheds. In addition to, we're currently undertaking a study to take a look at the health connections and hubs for wildlife management, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of things there too, but the biodiversity piece is becoming increasingly more important, where cities and countries and so on are recognizing our connections and dependence on nature and vice versa. And the last one, for green infrastructure development regulations, guidelines, and standards, I'll give us a 1 there. We're still, again, proceeding and learning, and we have still a fair ways to go there. But for Maple Ridge, at least that gate has opened up, and the discussion piece is becoming a little bit more in the status quo. But that's where I really encourage communities as a whole to, again, encourage their own local governments to take a look at this and all of the efficiencies and effectiveness of nature-based solutions across the globe. Over the last 20 years, I've been looking at that, how effective they've been for all of the elements Bill had mentioned before, climate change, intensification, and weather events and so on. It's been really amazing to see what people are doing.
Okay, so we determined as well that it's really, really important for a city to have a way of communicating and reaching out to its citizens, its community. So this section is all about outreach and education.
Yeah, so for municipal climate change resiliency, I'm gonna give us a 0 right now for that, and the reason for that is we've had a trouble in a sense trying to tackle the larger climate change as a whole, as an abstract concept. We're slow on that one. It's not that we are unwilling to do it. However, it's been more through working with advocacy groups of supporting, more of a stronger focus point on those elements. Indirectly, I'd say the city's been doing an excellent job of putting in programs and action items that do facilitate climate change resiliency, but we're not there yet. And that's why I give us a 0 at this point. There's a lot of things in the wings and in the back rooms we're talking about what we can do. But again, that's really important to focus from my perspective on tangible elements, as opposed to, some people prefer to call it extreme weather events, as opposed to trying to fix global sort of climate change issues and so on. But it's all in the dialogue and the packaging. What is your community comfortable with in terms of tackling global issues or regional or local issues? Biodiversity conservation, I'm going to probably give us a 1 here. Our community is not specifically the focus. I wouldn't call it biodiversity, but in terms of protection and management of our natural areas and features, like our riparian areas and our steep slopes, our community has done really well protecting those areas. Watershed planning and management and ISMPs. We just went through a whole process with our major watersheds, developing integrated stormwater management plans. We have a long ways to go still with some of our watershed planning initiatives of working with external agencies, provincial crown lands, for example, First Nations, woodlot managers outside of our administrative boundaries. But internally within our boundaries, I think I'd give us a 1. We've done as a community a fair bit to try and look at how we can improve the health of our watersheds. Green infrastructure management strategy and outreach program. I'm going to score us at a 0 for now, and the reason for that is a lot of the focus we've had as a community in the last few years has been internal, and it's been with specific advisory committees from amongst the public, but we haven't launched yet a larger public outreach campaign. Bill and I are currently working on that with some of our subcommittees and advisory committees, and that will come in time. But it's a very important part of what we do. And the Municipal Advisory Committee related to green infrastructure, that's been a really important piece for me to take a look at how we can reach the public to get out there to different stakeholders to discuss these items. Bill?
Okay, so in the next section,
sorry, I should give us a score. We'll put a 1 down there.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, we just met last night. We had 1. Performance targets for municipal green infrastructure does your municipality have, and then each one of these. Some of them I'm just noticing, no matter how many times I went through this document, I'm finding that we have a few repeats. So we might tweak this a little bit, because some of this stuff we've already talked about. Or maybe it just wrapped up in some of the larger pieces, but quickly score this one. We've got 12 minutes left. So the last speaker will quick.
Yeah, the performance targets here, I think the reason we put these back into is some performance targets were specific for different purposes, and this one was related to conservation and natural assets and so on. So again, I'm going to put access to nature, policies and performance targets. I'm going to provide a 0 here for the city, and the reason for that is we've been able to fare fairly well in our greenfield development areas, the areas that are new developments out in nature. But with respect to the newer redevelopment of our urban infill areas, we are working on that. That's part of our policy and our green infrastructure strategy. But we really need to develop the performance targets and bylaws for that. The climate change resiliency targets, again, I'm going to give us a 0 at this point in time. The reason being is those things are on the docket. They're being discussed right now. We're trying to figure out what the appropriate targets are. Maple Ridge does have some resiliency targets. They weren't necessarily geared towards climate change per se, but they are effective and instrumental in that. But we don't have a strong climate change emphasis or focus. So that's why I give us a 0 there. GHG offsets, again, we've had major reforestation programs within our community to focus on offsets and carbon sequestration, but we have targets in place, But again, building the bridge between the performance targets and putting making that action items on the ground, I'm going to do a 0 there because we're not there yet. We're working on those elements, but we are definitely in the front door. Water and drainage, integrated stormwater management plans, I'll give us a 1. And the last one, for the establishing clear greenway networks through the neighborhood. That's currently a strategy that we're working on this year. We're trying to roll that out over the next year or two to emphasize the importance not only of network of green links, to our healthy natural areas where the greenfield development is, but within our urban areas, how can we provide linkages to natural areas and features, whether that be gardens or rooftop areas or semi-private and public spaces. That's part of the dialogue. So I'm going to put us at a 0 there for now. And again, those are things Maple Ridge are working on.
Okay, one of the things that I noticed in some of the area plans and stuff, we're working on it kind of within the area plan, but then we're not connecting neighborhoods to neighborhoods type thing.
Yeah, it's a dialogue that requires patience and tenacity and a lot of collaboration communication. So it starts with the fact that we've got language within our official community plan. Then it went to language within our area plans, language now that's within our development permit guidelines. It's a patience piece. And I have to say, from a local government planning perspective, my experience, some of these things can take 3 to 5 years for these things to actually start to get to fruition and implementation.
So our last tab is health and community well-being. I think the one thing that COVID showed us is the importance of getting outside and cities promoting and encouraging that. So this one explores how your municipality supports physical health, mental health, and quality of life, livability, while improving safety and reducing crime, perception of danger in your municipality. How have you been using your green spaces with health and well-being? So again, 4 really quick questions. We'll move through them, Rod, in maybe about 5 minutes here. We've got.
I'm going to give us a 3 on this one, Bill. And again, we just had our Parks Department coming in to work with our Environmental Advisory Committee last night. And they are working on a new parks master plan that does recognize the importance of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that's what we're moving towards. We've had great dialogue and collaboration with parks over the last few years.
Yeah. And where I was kind of going with this one is a lot of municipalities and communities have really good indoor programs, but what are they doing to organize outdoor activities as well?
Yeah.
So the next one is how many kilometers of nature trails or multi-use pathways are available to the public in your municipality? And this one was, I kind of had to put a way of measuring. So we did it per 100,000 of population. And you can see there that greater than 200 kilometers, between 100 and 200 kilometers, again, per 100,000 or less than.
Yeah. So these are nature trails, but they could also include multi-use pathways that have been greened up for the community. And again, the emphasis being on the active transportation choices. So moving away from car-centric planning and design was the main focus of this. And how can we encourage people to gain access to our natural areas or amenity areas across the city without having to get into a car? So Maple Ridge, we happen to have, I think about 250 to 300 kilometers of actual municipal trails in our community. Said we've been blessed and working with a lot of different recreation groups, have worked and incorporated them in many cases into our riparian protection zones. So we're not having to purchase the land. We were able to integrate solutions into these I'll call it nature-based solutions that we're using. Again, integrated focus on how you can get the best bang for the buck with these solutions. And the final one of what percentage of your municipal citizens have public parks within a 10-minute walk? I don't know. So I'm going to say in our community, we have a great access to natural areas within our greenfield areas. Again, the new developments, but within our urban infill, the redevelopment of those areas, that's one of the pieces that I've explored, and I've asked our Parks Department to work with me on to figure out, social equity, access to nature, and so on. So I'm going to put it down at, right now, we probably have somewhere between 50 and 90% of our citizens, number 3. But
that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, now the last one is the importance of food security is also something that seems to have really taken off with the COVID thing. Being a garden center owner, I can attest to that. So we wanted to touch a little bit on whether your community supports community gardens or food hubs, I guess, and to what degree. So that's what this question is.
Yeah. So our city does have, we do have our own municipal owned community gardens. So I can give us a 5 here. But, and the caveat to that, I'd like to have more. And as we develop in our urban areas, especially, that's again engaging the conversations around rooftop gardens and how much, in terms of access to space, natural areas, and community garden spaces, what can the municipality do along with the development community to facilitate these shared garden areas?
Okay, so that's it. Lauren, you can total it up. I don't think I'll be submitting it as an entry.
No.
But you know what? So we've got 76. That's 3/4 of it, which I would think puts us at a pretty good level. So I think, for the purposes of, and Susan, maybe you could even chip in here. You can see how this might be difficult for some of the Communities in Bloom committees to do this work without sitting beside somebody from the city like I just did. So I think, what it does prove, though, is it gives you a really quick snapshot of where you're at. And I think it also can point out really quickly for those communities that maybe don't score so well, what areas you need to do some work in. So for the communities that are interested in this year, we'll have the form. I think we'll tweak it a little bit after today. We'll have the form available. And I think before you have the judge visit, or if you're just doing a self-assessment and want to submit it, you need to somehow make an appointment to sit down with somebody from the city, unless you're blessed on your committee to have actually somebody within the city on your committee, which I know some communities do have. The other thing, Rod, can you just speak a little bit to the scalability of this? Do you think it applies to small communities as well as large ones?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, Maple Ridge, although we are a city, we are a relatively non-wealthy city, I'd say, and a smaller city compared to most in the Metro Vancouver area. I think that's one of the pieces for me that's been really important, has been to learn from the lessons of internationally, nationally, and elsewhere, trying to figure out where the pitfalls and the failures were, along with the successes, because we cannot afford to, fall down and make those big, expensive mistakes. And so my kudos off to, the thousands of communities out there who've already been doing a lot of work in this area. So I'm following on their coattails to a large degree. And I want to emphasize the importance of not this. To me, I don't want to score Maple Ridge too high, because that indicates we're doing enough or that we've done too much. So the importance for me really was to generate the dialogue amongst the different city stakeholders. Here's some ideas as to how you might be able to proceed and move forward. And that for me was more about the education awareness around these different tools in the toolkit rather than the actual final score.
I'll let you wrap up.
If I can just step in here for a minute, we do have a few questions. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very, very, very much, Bill and Rod. That is an amazing, comprehensive template that I know the communities that I've been to and will be going to will definitely be using it. But there are a few questions that maybe you could address them briefly, because we're just about out of time. First one is from Kathleen Matthews. I really like Rodney's idea of bringing the water retention areas above ground. But you also added, for stormwater management, can we also include management of snow?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think what I love about what the world is doing today is it's unlimited in terms of how we can harness the resources that nature provides us with. And for sure, each different region and area is going to have its own unique challenges and opportunities. And for me, I love that sort of idiom of turning lemons into lemonade. And so for me, that's always a great challenge. And how can we put these things to work for ourselves? So for sure, I said I love that idea.
Okay, thank you. And there's also a comment from Anthony O'Neill. Aside from suggesting, first of all, congratulations to Maple Ridge for its vision. Aside from suggesting that each community should hire someone of your caliber and be fortunate enough to have Bill living in town, what do you suggest is the best approach for engaging communities on the importance of all these necessary approaches to development?
That's the outreach portion.
Yeah, I'd say for sure, for me, it starts with the inquiries and the dialogue. The dialogue both with the members in the community who have an interest in these types of topics, i.e. the community in Bloom members and the network of people that are there, but also finding a champion, at least one, and if not more, from the city that you can start to dialogue with and engage in the conversations with them as well. That is my recommendation initially. There's so much information out there. And I'm hoping that with Bill and I, put a first foot forward to try and put together this checklist, it's an opportunity for dialogue to facilitate further dialogue and thinking and improvements on, what can cities do. So I'd say, taking that first step is have a chat with the people in your neighborhood, in your community, the public and the private and the realms to figure out how can you engage and get that foot in the door.
And talk to your IT departments too, because we had a presentation last night from the Parks Master Plan, and on the Maple Ridge website, there's an interactive tool that all of you can go find that has points of interest throughout their whole program, and you can zoom right in and make a specific comment about a specific parklet or whatever. And we're also doing things like we're working on an area plan, and the public can do a virtual tour, a virtual walkthrough of the whole area without leaving their computer. So there's lots of ways of engaging citizens that don't even involve getting them out of their chair.
And guest speakers, Bill, I wanted to mention, we've been able to bring in all kinds of amazing guest speakers remotely to share their information. The people have been so forthcoming and generous with their time, wanting to assist where they can, different communities and moving things forward. So we've had about 5 speakers so far on different topics related to green infrastructure that went online, and that was with our departments and with the Environmental Advisory Committee and so on.
And there were some world-class speakers. I can share that link. It's just the Maple Ridge Green Infrastructure YouTube channel.
Okay, thank you, and I hope you do that, Bill. Sonia has also included a link in the chat to the application form that we've just gone through so that others can take a look at it as well. But I want to thank both of you so much for your informative presentations. It's all of our community, and to thank all the communities that participated today. We also want to give a big thank you to our 2022 CIB sponsors this year. And don't forget to register for our next webinar on July 14th, Connecting People and Plants for a Greener, Healthier Urban Climate. And we hope to see you there. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.